From Grande to Juan Fernandez. Nothing remarkable happened till December 6th, when we had close cloudy weather with showers. Wind at east by north. We saw a large bird called albatross, who spread their wings from 8 to 10 foot wide and are much like a gannet. December 7th, rainy weather with thunder and lightning, a brisk gale from east by north to northeast. This day I removed one of the boatswain's mates and put Robert Hullenby, one of our best sailors, in his place. December 10th. Yesterday I exchanged Benjamin Long, one of the boatswain's mates, with Thomas Hughes, boatswain's mate, on board the Duchess. He being mutinous there, they were willing to be rid of him. December 13th. We had a strong gale of wind at southwest. Yesterday in the afternoon we reefed our main sail, which was the first time since we left England. December 15th. The colour of the water being changed very much, we founded but had no ground, so that this change is probably occasioned by the nature of the ground at bottom. We find it much colder in this latitude, which is 43 degrees 30 minutes south, than in the like degree north, though the sun was in its furthest extent to the southward, which may be ascribed partly to our coming newly out of warmer climates, which made us more sensible of the cold, or 'tis probable the winds blow over larger tracts of ice than in the same degrees of north latitude. December 18th. Cold, hazy, rainy weather. Yesterday in the afternoon one of the Duchess's men fell out of his mizzen-top down on the quarter-deck and broke his skull. They desired the advice of our surgeon, and I went on board with our two, where they examined the wound but found the man irrecoverable, so that he died and was buried next day. Brisk gales from the west-northwest to the west by south. December 19th. Cold, airy weather. We saw several grampuses and a great number of uncommon sort of porpoises, black on their back and fins, and white underneath, with sharp white noses. They often leaped a good height out of the water, turning their white bellies uppermost. They were much of the shape and bigness of our porpoises. We also saw many seals. December 20th. This day, according to what our committee agreed at Grande, we exchanged Mr. Vanbrugh for Mr. Bath, agent of the Duchess. Easy gales of wind, but very veerable. This morning at 4 we had a very thick fog, when we were caught in the stays, and lost sight of the Duchess, though we made all the noise agreed on between us. At 9 o'clock it cleared up, being very little wind, and we were within a league of them. December 21st. Easy gales of wind, but very veerable. We have seen a great deal of rock weed for some days past, of a great length, and generally round in large branches. Latitude 48 degrees 50 minutes south. December 22nd. Fair weather with rain, wind very veerable. The water is generally discoloured. We had a good observation. Latitude 49 degrees 32 minutes south. December 22nd. At 10 this morning we saw land, bearing south-southeast, distant 9 leagues. It appeared first in 3, afterwards in several more islands. At 12 it bore south 1/2 west, the west end distant 6 leagues, a long tract of land. We saw most of that which appeared at first to be islands join with the lowlands. The wind being westerly and blowing fresh, we could not weather it, but was forced to bear away and run along shore from 3 to 4 leagues distant. It lay as near as we could guess east-northeast and west-southwest. This is Falkland's Land, described in few draughts, and none lay it down right, though the latitude agrees pretty well. The middle of it lies in latitude 51 degrees 0 minutes south, and I make the longitude of it to be about 61 degrees 54 minutes west from London. The 2 islands extend about 2 degrees in length, as near as I could judge by what I saw. December 24th. Last night we reefed both courses, it blowing strong, lay by from 8 till 3 in the morning, with our heads to northward, wind at west by south, because we could not tell how far Falkland Islands ran to eastward. Between 2 and 3 o'clock yesterday in the afternoon we ran by a high, round, large, white, remarkable rock, which appeared by itself near 3 leagues without the land, which is not unlike Portland, but not so high, and the rock like that called the Fastnest, to the westward of Cape Clear in Ireland. At 4 yesterday in the afternoon the northeast end bore southeast by south 7 leagues, the White Rock bore south 3 leagues. At 6, the eastermost land in sight bore southeast 7 leagues. All this land appeared with gentle descents from hill to hill, and seemed to be good ground, with woods and harbors. At 3 o'clock we made sail, steering southeast, latitude 52° south. December 25th. Yesterday noon we saw the land again, and find it to trim away southerly from the White Rock. A strong gale of wind at southwest. At 6 o'clock in the evening we lost sight of the land, but could not come near enough to see if it was inhabited, and spied a sail under our lee bow, bearing southeast from us, distant about 4 leagues. We immediately let our reefs out, chased and got ground of her apace. We kept sight till 10 at night, when we lost her. We spoke with our consort, and were both of the opinion that the chase would, as soon as she lost sight of us, if homeward bound, bear away to the northward. So we ran north till dawning, then we stood to the westward till it was light, and our consort kept on with an easy sail. When it was full light we saw nothing, being thick hazy weather. We bore away, and were with our consort again by 5 o'clock. Between 6 and 7 it cleared up. We saw the chase bearing about south by east, between 3 and 4 leagues from us. It falling calm, we both got out our oars, rowed and towed, with our boats ahead, and made pretty good way. Had a small breeze at north, so we set all the sail we could, and by 12 o'clock had gained very much ground of the chase. We had an observed latitude 52° 40'. December 26th. We kept on rowing and towing till about 6 in the evening, and perceiving we approached her, I went in the boat to speak with Captain Courtney, and agree how to engage her, if a great ship, as she appeared to be, and also adjusted signals if either of us should find it proper to board her in the night. I returned aboard as soon as possible, when we had a fine breeze. We got in our boats and oars, and made all possible sail after the chase, kept in sight of her till past 10 o'clock, bearing south-southwest of us, when it came on thick again. We kept her open on the larboard, and the Dutchess on the starboard bow, and being short nights, we thought it impossible to lose one another. At 1 o'clock this morning my officers persuaded me to shorten sail, telling me we should lose our consort if we kept on. I was prevailed with to do so, and in the morning had a very thick fog, so that I could see neither our consort nor chase till an hour after 'twas full light. But when it cleared up, we saw our consort on our larboard bow. We fired a gun for her to bear down, but immediately we saw the chase ahead of her about 4 miles, which gave us new life. We forthwith hailed up for them, but the wind soon veering ahead had a great disadvantage in the chase. We ran at a great rate, being smooth water, but it coming on to blow more and more, the chase outbore our consort, so she gave off, and being to windward, came down very melancholy to us, supposing the chase to have been a French homeward bound ship from the South Seas. Thus this ship escaped, which, considering that we always outwent her before, is as strange as our first seeing of her in this place, because all ships that we have heard of bound out or home this way kept within Falkland's Island. At 12 o'clock we saw a little plain low island, which bore west-northwest, distant 4 leagues, not marked in any of our charts. The wind has been very veerable since 6 o'clock last night, from the north-northeast to the south, where it now is. Latitude 53° 11' south. December 22nd. Strong gales with squalls from the south to the west. The Dutchess put her guns into the hold again that she took up in the chase. Yesterday at 2 in the afternoon we put about and stood off to the eastward from the little low island, because we could but just weather it. We were not willing to come too near it. Latitude 54° 15' south. December 30th. Fresh gales of wind at west, hazy weather mixed with small rain. We had an observed latitude 58° 20'. January 1. Fresh gales of wind from the west-northwest to the west-southwest with fogs, but indifferent smooth water. This being New Year's Day, every officer was wished a Merry New Year by our music, and I had a large tub of punch hot upon the quarter-deck, where every man in the ship had above a pint to his share, and drank our owners' and friends' healths in Great Britain, to a happy New Year, a good voyage, and a safe return. We bore down to our consort, and gave them 3 huzzas, wishing them the like. January 2nd. Fresh gales from the west-southwest to the northwest, with fogs. Clothes and liquor were now an excellent commodity amongst our ship's company, who are but meanly stored. We had 6 tailors at work for several weeks to make them clothing, and pretty well supplied their wants by the spare blankets and red clothes belonging to the owners. And what every officer could spare was altered for the men's use. The like was done on board the Dutchess. January 5th. Just past 12 yesterday it came on to blow strong. We got down our foreyard and reefed our foresail and mainsail, but there came a violent gale of wind and a great sea. A little before 6 we saw the Dutchess lowering her main yard. The tack flew up and the lift unreeved, so that the sail to the leeward was in the water and all aback. Their ship took in a great deal of water to leeward. Immediately they loosed their sprit sail and wore her before the wind. I wore after her and came as near as I could to 'em, expecting when they had gotten their main sail stowed, they would take another reef in, and bring to again under a 2 reefed mainsail, and reefed and balanced mizzen, if the ship would not keep to without it. But to my surprise they kept scudding to the southward. I dreaded running amongst ice because it was excessive cold, so I fired a gun as a signal for them to bring to, and brought to ourselves again under the same reefed main sail. They kept on, and our men on the lookout told me they had an ensign in their main top mast shrouds, as a signal of distress, which made me doubt they had sprung their mainmast. So I wore again, our ship working exceeding well in this great sea. Just before night I was up with them again, and set our foresail twice reefed to keep 'em company, which I did all night. About 3 this morning it grew more moderate, we soon after made a signal to speak with them, and at 5 they brought to. When I came within hail, I inquired how they all did aboard. They answered, they had shipped a great deal of water in lying by, and were forced to put before the wind, and the sea had broke in the cabin windows and over their stern, filling their steerage and waist, and had like to have spoiled several men. But God be thanked, all was otherwise indifferent well with them, only they were intolerably cold and everything wet. At 10 we made sail, wind at W.N.W. and moderate. Latitude 60° 58'. January 6th. Raw cold weather with some rain, a great sea from the northwest, little wind from the north-northwest to the west. I and Captain Dampier went in the yawl on board the Dutchess to visit 'em after this storm, where we found 'em in a very orderly pickle, with all their clothes drying, the ship and rigging covered with them from the deck to the maintop. They got 6 more guns into the hold to make the ship lively. January 7th. Fresh gales of wind with hazy weather and some small rain. Yesterday about 3 in the afternoon, John Vale, a landman, died, having lain ill a fortnight, and had a swelling in his legs ever since he left Grande. At 9 last night we buried him. This is the first that died by sickness out of both ships since we left England. Several of the Dutchess's men had contracted illnesses by the wet and cold. Wind from the north-northwest to the west-northwest. January 10th. Strong gales of wind with squalls of rain and hail, and a great sea from the west. We lay by with our head to the southward till 12 last night, then came to sail under 3 reefed courses, and sometimes the main top sail low set, wind from the west to the north, and thence to the northwest. We have no night here. Latitude 61° 53', longitude west from London 79° 58', being the furthest we run this way, and for aught we know the furthest that anyone has yet been to the southward. January 14th. Moderate gales with cloudy weather, wind veerable. This day the Dutchess buried a man that died of the scurvy. January 15th. Cloudy weather with squalls of rain, fresh gales at southwest. We had an observed latitude 56° south. We now account ourselves in the South Sea, being got round Cape Horn. The French ships that came first to trade in these seas came through the Straits of Magellan, but experience has taught them since that it is best passage to go around Cape Horn, where they have sea room enough, the straits being in many places very narrow, with strong tides and no anchor ground. Here I think it proper to give an account of the first discovery of the South Sea, of the passage to it by the Straits of Magellan, of the chief of those who have passed those straits, and a short description of the country on both sides of 'em. An account of the discovery of the South Sea and of the Straits of Magellan, etc., from O. Vale and other authors. The first European who discovered the South Sea was Vasco or Vasco Nunez de Balboa, a Spaniard, in 1513. He was the first who landed on the Isthmus of Darien and made war with the caciques or princes, who not being able to resist his firearms, and perceiving that the chief design of the Spaniards was to find gold, one of the caciques told Vasco that since they were so fond of that which he and his countryman valued so little, would he conduct them over the mountains to another sea, upon which they might find a country where the people had all their utensils of gold. This was the first notice the Spaniards had of the South Sea. Vasco marched on till he came near the top of the highest mountain, where he ordered his men to halt, because he would have the honor of first discovering that sea himself; which having done, he fell down on his knees and thanked God for his success, and called it the South Sea, in opposition to that on the other side of the continent. Having passed these mountains, he marched down till he came to the coast, and took possession of it in the name of the King of Spain. When he returned back, he found a new Spanish governor in Darien, called Pedrarias, who, being his enemy because he envied the king's making him governor and admiral of the South Sea, he falsely accused him of treason and cut off his head, and sent Gaspar Morales and Francis Pizarro to complete the discovery, with a good number of men and large dogs that were as terrible to the Indians as the Spaniards' firearms. Here they discovered the Isle of Pearls, and forced the natives to fish for them, then discovered the rest of the coast. The first who found a passage from the North Sea was Ferdinand Magellan, who in 1519 sailed on purpose by commission from the Emperor Charles V to discover it. In latitude 52° south he found the passage, which from him has been since called the Straits of Magellan. Pigafetta, an Italian who made the voyage with him, says that in south latitude 49½ at Port St. Julian they found giants whose waist a middle-sized man could scarce reach with his head. They were clad with the skins of beasts as monstrous as themselves, armed with huge bows and arrows, and of a strength proportional to their bulk, yet good-natured. One of them, seeing himself in a looking-glass on board the ship, was so frightened that he runned backwards and tumbled down several men that stood behind him. The crew gave toys to some of them, at which being mightily pleased, they suffered them to put shackles about their arms and legs, which they took for ornaments; but when they found themselves fast, bellowed like bulls. One of them, he says, made his escape from 9 men after they had got him down and tied his hands. Other voyagers say they have seen such giants in these parts, particularly Mr. Candish, Sebald de Wert in 1599, and Spilberg in 1614. But the reader may believe of this story what he pleases. Pigafetta says the straits were 110 leagues long, in some places very wide, and in others not above a half league over. Magellan passed them in November 1520. And being overjoyed, he called the cape from whence he first saw the South Sea, the Cape of Desire. After rambling almost 4 months in the South Sea, where he suffered extreme want, and lost many of his men, he sailed to the Ladrones Islands, and foolishly engaging 7,000 natives in Mathan, which is one of them, he was killed. One of his ships forsook him as he passed the straits, and returned to Spain. Of the other 4, only the ship Victoria returned to St. Lucar near Seville, under the command of John Sebastian Cabot, who was nobly rewarded by the Emperor. In 1539 Alonso de Camargo, a Spaniard, passed the same straits, and arrived at the port of Arequipa in Peru, but much shattered, having lost one of his ships, and another leaving him, returned to Spain. After him several other Spaniards passed the same way, and they planted a colony and garrison at the north end, to block up the passage to other nations, but without success, the garrison being all starved or destroyed by the Indians. On the 15th of November, 1577, the famous Sir Francis Drake set out from Plymouth with 5 sail, and having touched at several places by the way, entered the straits the 21st of August following. He found them very dangerous, because of the many turnings, contrary winds, and sudden blasts from high mountains covered with snow on both sides, and their tops reaching above the clouds, and no anchoring but in some narrow river or creek. The 24th he came to an island in the straits, where there were so many fowls called penguins, that his men killed 3,000 in a day, which served them for provisions. The 6th of September he entered the South Sea, where he met with dreadful storms, and one of his ships was drove back into the straits, through which she returned to England, as Sir Francis Drake did July 24th, 1580, being the first sea captain that ever sailed round the world, and brought his ship home, which was accounted a great honor to the English nation. July 1st, 1586, Mr. Thomas Candish, afterwards Sir Thomas, sailed from Plymouth with 3 ships, and the 6th of January after enter'd the Straits, having met with a severe storm near the mouth of 'em. He took the remainders of a Spanish garrison there, who from 400 were reduced to 23 by famine, and those of King Philip's City which had been built in the Straits were in the same miserable condition, so that they abandoned the place. They found cannibals in some part of the Straits who had eat many of the Spaniards, and designed the like to the English, had they not been kept off by their guns. Mr. Candish was stopp'd here a considerable while by a furious storm and bad weather, which reduced him to want of provisions, till the 24th of February that he got into the South Sea, and bought provisions of the Indians. Mr. Candish returned to England after having sailed round the world, the 9th of September next year. He again attempted the passage of the same Straits in 1591, but without success, as Mr. Fenton did in 1582. As Flores did at the same time, the Earl of Cumberland in 1586. Mr. Chidley in 1589, and Mr. Wood in 1596. Sir Richard Hawkins passed them in 1593, but was taken by the Spaniards. And Mr. Davis, the discoverer, to the northwest passed and repassed those straits, but was forced back by contrary winds. So that our countrymen, though they did not all succeed in the attempt, yet have been the most fortunate in passing them of any other nation, for the Dutch passed them in 1597 with 5 ships, of which only 1 returned. 5 other Dutch ships passed them in 1614, when they lost one of them. In 1623 the Dutch Nassau fleet, so called because the Prince of Orange was the greatest adventurer, attempted it with 15 brave ships and 2 or 3,000 men, but were repulsed wherever they came to land by the Spaniards, so that they could not settle there. Other nations attempted it likewise, and particularly Don Garcia de Loaisa, a knight of Malta and a Spaniard, with 7 ships and 450 men, and though he passed the straits, he died himself, and all his ships were afterwards taken by the Portuguese or others. Vargas, Bishop of Placentia, sent 7 ships to attempt it, one of which only succeeded, and went to Arequipa, a port on the South Sea, and discovered the situation of the coast of Peru, but went no further. Ferdinand Cortez, the conqueror of New Spain, sent 2 ships and 400 men in 1528 to discover the way to the Moluccas through the straits, but without success. 2 Genoese ships were the first that attempted it in 1526 after Magellan, but could not effect it. Sebastian Cabot tried it also by commission from Don Emmanuel, King of Portugal, but could not do it. Americus Vespucius was sent by the same prince, but could neither find the straits nor the river of La Plata. Simon Alcazar, a Spaniard, attempted it likewise with several ships and 440 men, but came back without performing it, his men having mutinied. All these attempts by the Spaniards, etc., happened before Sir Francis Drake performed it. In the reports made of those straits upon oath to the Emperor Charles V, those who attempted this passage give the following account, viz., that from the Cape of 11,000 Virgins at the entrance of the North Sea, to the Cape of Desire at the entrance of the South Sea, it is 100 Spanish leagues. That they found in this strait 3 great bays of about 7 leagues wide from land to land, but the entrances not above half a league, and encompassed with such high mountains that the sun never shines in them, so that they are intolerably cold, there being a continual snow, and the nights very long. That they found good water with cinnamon trees and several others, which though they look green, burnt in the fire like dry wood. That they found many good sorts of fish, good harbours with 15 fathom water, and several pleasant rivers and streams. That the tides of both seas meet about the middle of the straits with a prodigious noise and shock. But some of the Portuguese who had passed the straits say they are only high floods which last about a month, rise to a great height, and sometimes fall so low and ebb so fast that they leave ships on dry ground. The reader may find more of this in Herrera's history, but others differ in their accounts, and particularly Spilberg, a Dutchman, who mentions a port here that he called famous, by way of eminency, the adjacent soil producing fruit of various colours and excellent taste, and affording brooks of very good water. He mentions 24 other ports besides those that he did not see, and particularly the Pimento or Pepper Harbor, so called because of the trees which grow there of an aromatic smell, whose bark tastes like pepper, and is more hot and quick than that of the East Indies. The Spaniards having brought some of it to Seville, it was sold there for 2 crowns a pound. The last of our countrymen who passed them was Sir John Narborough, who set out from the Thames, May 15, 1669, with 2 ships. He had King Charles II's commission, was furnished out at his Majesty's charge, and entered the Straits October 22 following. He says, that from the entrance of this strait to the Narrow, there's good anchorage, and not much tide, but in the Narrow the tide runs very strong. The flood sets into the straits, and the ebb out, keeping its course as on other coasts. It rises and falls near 4 fathom perpendicular, and it is high water here on the change of the moon at 11 o'clock. When he came to the Narrow, he found the tide very strong, which endangered the running of his ships upon the steep rocks on the north side. From the first Narrow to the second is above 8 leagues, and the reach betwixt them 7 leagues broad. He found a bay on the north side at the point of the second Narrow, where one may ride in 8 fathom water in clear sandy ground half a mile from the shore. In the channel of the second Narrow he found 38 fathom water, and several bays and cliffs with little islands. He exchanged several trifles with the natives for bows and arrows and their skin coats. They were of a middle stature, well limbed, with round faces, low foreheads, little noses, small black eyes and ears, black flaggy hair of an indifferent length, their teeth white, their faces of an olive color, daubed with spots of white clay and streaks of soot, their bodies painted with red earth and grease, their clothing of the skins of seals, guanacos, and otters, wrapped about them like the Scotch Highlanders' plaids. They had caps of the skins of fowls with the feathers on, and pieces of skins on their feet to keep them from the ground. They are very active and nimble, and when about business go quite naked. Only the women have a piece of skin before them, and differ from the men in habit only by want of caps, and having bracelets of shells about their necks. They seem to have no manner of government nor religion, live by hunting and fishing, and are armed with bows and arrows, the latter 18 inches long, and headed with flint stones. These people Sir John found in Elizabeth Isle, which lies near the second Narrow. In Port Famine Bay, south latitude 53° 35', he found good wood and water, and abundance of pimento trees. Their language is guttural and slow. Sir John is of opinion that the mountains contain gold or copper. He computes the whole length of the straits at 116 leagues. For the rest we refer to him. I have insisted the longer on these straits, partly because they are so much talked of, and partly to justify our going to the South Seas by the way of Cape Horn, which is far more safe, so that in all probability the Straits of Magellan will be little frequented by Europeans in time to come. The land on the north side of the straits is called Patagonia, and that on the south Terra del Fuego, because of the numerous fires and the great smoke which the first discoverers saw upon it. It extends the whole length of the straits, and lies from east to west about 130 leagues, according to Ovalle, and before the discovery of the Straits of St. Vincent, otherwise called Lemare's Straits, was supposed to join to some part of the Terra Australis. Ovalle says that on the continent of Chile, near the Straits of Magellan, there's a people called Cesares, who are supposed to be descended from a part of the Spaniards that were forced ashore in the straits, when the Bishop of Placentia sent the ships above mentioned to discover the Molucca Islands. 'Tis supposed they contracted marriages with some Indian nation, where they have multiplied, and taught them to build cities and the use of bells. Ovalle says that when he wrote the History of Chile, he received letters and other informations that there is such a nation in those parts, and that one of the missionaries had been in the country with Captain Navarro, and found the people to be of a white complexion with red in their cheeks. By the shape of their bodies they seemed to be men of courage and activity, and by the goodness of their complexion 'twas probable they might be mixed up with a race of Flemings, who had been shipwrecked in those parts. But there being no farther account of these people since Ovalle's account of Chile in the year 1646, we believe this relation to be fabulous. M. de Bouchenguin, who is the last that attempted the passage of the Straits of Magellan that we have heard of, came to an anchor at the Virgin's Cape in the mouth of this strait on the 24th of June, 1699. And the wind being contrary, he lay at anchor betwixt the continent and Terra del Fuego. He weighed again, the winds being still contrary, and on the 3rd of July anchored at Port Famine in the straits, where the Spaniards had built a garrison, but were forced to quit it for want of provisions. He observes that from the mouth of the straits to this place the climate seemed to be as temperate as in France, though now the coldest season of the year in those parts. He found abundance of wood for firing, but the greatest inconveniency he met with there was from the great storms of snow, though it did not lie long, being carried off by rains which come from the west. He is of opinion that a settlement might easily be made here in a part of the country extending above 20 leagues, that he was informed the islands of St. Elizabeth in the Straits are proper enough for corn and cattle if planted with them. He sent his sloop ashore on Terra del Fuego, where he saw fires, and found the savage natives by 50 or 60 together in companies, and some of them came aboard his ship that lay 5 leagues from the shore. They were very peaceable and friendly, but more miserable than our beggars in Europe, having no clothes but a straight coat of wild beast skins, that comes no lower than their knees, and pitiful huts made up of poles covered with skins of beasts, and this is all the shelter they have against the extremity of the weather. They came in such multitudes to beg from him as soon made him weary of their company, so that he weighed again the 16th of August, and stopped at Port Galand to leave some letters there for those who were to follow him from France, as had been agreed upon. And here he observes that both the climate and the navigation of the Straits are very unequal, and that from this place to the entrance of the South Sea there's nothing but extraordinary high mountains on each side, from whence come very impetuous and frightful torrents, and scarce any place for anchorage to be found, or one day without either rain or snow. He adds that he found an island opposite to the mouth of the Strait of St. Jerome, that is set down in none of our maps. This island, he says, has 2 good harbors, which may be of great consequence to those who pass this way. He took possession of it, called it by the name of the island, Louis le Grand, the largest harbor he named Port Dauphin, and the lesser, which is very convenient, Port Philippeaux. After having given this character of the straits, he says one may be sure of a passage through them, provided it be in the proper season, but 'tis very difficult in the winter. He came out of those straits into the South Sea on the 21st of January, 1700, and went to view the harbor of San Domingo, which he says is the Spanish frontier, and the only place where a new settlement can be made there, the rest being all possessed already. He arrived there the 3rd of February, 1700, and on the 5th anchored on the east of an island, called by different names, but the latest authors call it St. Magdalen's Island. He sent his first lieutenant to view and take possession of it, who brought him word that it was a very pleasant place, and shewed him some fine beautiful shrubs and peas blossoms that he found upon the east side of it. From whence he conjectures that it may be a proper place to inhabit, though he owns that the climate is very moist, and they have frequent rains and mists, which he ascribes to the high mountains. He made ready to discover 4 other islands which lie in view of this isle and the mainland, and sounded as he went on, but durst not venture to go among them with so large a ship, because there blew a strong northwest wind, followed by a thick mist, which made him lose sight of land, so that to his great sorrow he could not complete the discovery of that frontier. He adds that 'tis full of high mountains down to the very sea, but was afterwards informed by a Spaniard who wintered in those parts that there's a very good harbor for ships to ride in, where they may be moored to tall trees, and that there are very few inhabitants on this coast, but some wandering savages like those on the Straits of Magellan. This and the other journals convince me entirely that the best way to the South Sea is around Cape Horn, the route we pursued in our voyage. Besides what I said from my own observation, to prove how extensive a trade we might have in those seas, I shall add the following observations from M. de Beauchesne, who says, that though he was looked upon as a freebooter, and that the then Spanish governors on those coasts were forbid to trade or suffer the people to trade with any but their own subjects in those seas, and that the Valdivia and other places they fired at him when he approached their harbors, and denied so much as to sell him any provisions, or to suffer him to wood or water, yet at Rica some particular persons traded with him to the value of 50,000 crowns, and told him that that place was not so proper for them to act so manifestly contrary to law. But if he went to a place more retired, they would buy all he had, though both his ships were full of goods. Accordingly, when he came to Hilo, a great number of merchants bought all that he had of value at good rates. He owns that the cloth he had on board was half rotten, that the merchants were vexed at their disappointment, and expressed their resentment that he should come to those parts so ill provided. But in other places the people bought all to the very rags he had on board, and brought him provision in abundance to sell, though they were forbid doing so on pain of death, and the officers themselves connived at it. He returned by the way of Cape Horn in 58 degrees 15 minutes, January 1701, and had as good a passage and season as could be desired, but saw no land on either side till the 19th of January 1701, when he discovered a small island about 3 or 4 leagues round, in latitude 50 degrees odd minutes, not marked in our maps, with strong currents near it, and on the 20th he came to the Isle of Sebald de Wert, which is a marshy land with some rocky mountains, no trees, but abundance of sea flow. It is proper here likewise to give an account of the Straits of Le Maire, so called from James Le Maire, an Amsterdam merchant, their discoverer in 1615. They lie in south latitude 55 degrees 36 minutes, and are formed by the Terra del Fuego on the west, and an island by the Dutch called Statenland, or the country of the States, on the east. The straits are 8 leagues wide, with good roads on each side, and plenty of fish and fowl. The land on both sides is high and mountainous. The discoverers saw very large fowls, bigger than sea mews, and their wings, when extended above a fathom long each. They were so tame that they flew into the ships and suffered the sailors to handle them. In latitude 57 degrees they saw 2 barren islands, which they called Barneveld, and the south cape of Terra del Fuego, which runs out in a point to latitude 57 degrees 48 minutes, they named Cape Horn. Some compute this strait to be only 5 leagues in length. Oval says that in 1619 the King of Spain being informed that Le Maire had discovered these straits, he sent 2 vessels to make a further discovery of them. These ships came to the east side of the Straits of Magellan, where the crew found a sort of giants higher by the head than any Europeans, who gave them gold in exchange for scissors and other baubles, but this can't be relied on. They went through this strait in less than a day's time, it being not above 7 leagues in length. I return now to my journal. January 16th, fresh gales of wind with cloudy weather. These 24 hours we had extraordinary smooth water, as if we were close under land. Indifferent warm weather, wind from the west-southwest to west by north. January 20. Yesterday at 3 in the afternoon we saw high land bearing east by north, distant about 10 leagues, being the land about Port St. Stephen's, on the coast of Patagonia in the South Sea, described in the drafts. South latitude 47 degrees. January 22. Fair weather with fresh gales of wind from west by south to the west-northwest. Last night George Cross died. He was a smith by trade and an armorer's mate. We and the Dutchess have had a great many men down with the cold, and some with the scurvy, the distemper that this man died of. The Dutchess had always more sick men than we, and have so now. They buried but 1 man that died of sickness, and tell us they hope the rest will recover. We have but 1 man whose life we doubt of, though most want a harbour. This day Captain Courtney and Captain Cook dined with us. At 2 o'clock we saw the land on the coast of Patagonia, being very high, distant about 14 leagues, latitude 44 degrees 9 minutes south. January 26th. Fresh gales with clouds and rain. We spoke with our consort this day, who complains their men grow worse and worse, and want a harbour to refresh them. Several of ours are also very indifferent, and if we don't get ashore and a small refreshment, we doubt we shall both lose several men. We are very uncertain of the latitude and longitude of Juan Fernandez, the books laying them down so differently that not one chart agrees with another, and being but a small island, we are in some doubts of striking it, so design to hail in for the main land to direct us. January 27th. Fair weather, smooth water, pleasant gales of wind. Veerable from the west to the northwest, had a good amplitude. Found the variation to be 10 degrees eastward. This is an excellent climate. Latitude 36 degrees 36 minutes south. January 28. We have had moderate weather. At 6 o'clock we saw the land, the easternmost appearing like an island, which we agreed to be the island of St. Mary, on the coast of Chile. It bore east by north, distance 9 or 10 leagues. Our consort's men are very ill. Their want of clothes, and being often wet in the cold weather, has been the greatest cause of their being sick more than our ship's company. January 31st. These 24 hours we had the wind between the south and southwest by west. At 7 this morning we made the island of Juan Fernandez. It bore west southwest, distant about 7 Leagues, at noon W by S. 6 Leagues. We had a good Observation. Latitude 34° 10' South.